Well, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's Parsha chavrusa study. We're going to study together. And we got a good little mixture here of Christians and Jews from all over the place. Canada, the States, Israel, we got Africa. Glad you're all able to join us. And so this format today is going to be the same as usual. We're going to have just a quick 10 to 15 minute intro here. Then we'll do our half hour small group discussion, come back together for 15 minutes at the end to bring out the highlights. And I'd like to welcome you guys back. Those of you who joined us last week for the first time, glad to see your faces here. Chris and Alan, nice to see you. And with that, Yair, I think I'd like to invite you to give us a little intro to the questions you prepared for this week, and we can start getting into the meat of the discussion.
Terrific.
Would you like me to share the screen?
Well, you know what? I will share.
All right. You have the power.
I will try. Just 1 second.
Oh my goodness. You have the power.
Right. Have a little pre-slide theme song getting little 80s synthesizer on top of it. That'd be great.
Oh,
Okay. So we will be talking about two readings. The one from Exodus, which we refer to as Parshat Mishpatim, and we will also relate to the Haftarah, which comes from Jeremiah 34. And as we'll immediately see, they're very strongly related. The very first commandment in Parshat Mishpatim, it says, "These are the rules that you shall set before them. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he shall go free without payment." Always ask myself, why is this the first of all of the laws that Moshe is teaching Israel? And again, we must bear in mind that the one who played a huge role in what we're about to see is Jethro, right? Because Jethro last week, he actually told Moshe that he has to start educating the people with the laws of the Torah by empowering others, create a hierarchy of different courts and judges so that they will all be involved. We'll actually see this in this parsha, because in this parsha, he's not only going to be teaching the people, but he's actually going to be writing them down, and they're going to be distributing these laws. So Moshe is beginning to disseminate Torah for the first time, to disseminate Torah in an organized way that one might say is even according to the guidelines that Jethro had proposed. Another thing that we see here is that the people last week had issues with hearing God directly, and they asked Moshe to be the spokesman, to be the one that will talk to God. And therefore now God says, okay, that's what you wanted. So instead of me being able to talk to everybody directly and explain to everyone directly what the 10 Commandments means, I'm going to tell Moshe what the 10 Commandments means. And what we see here is the beginning of a detailed explanation regarding the different 10 Commandments, what they mean, so that it can be disseminated as we described before. So the obvious first question is, which of the 10 Commandments does this relate to? So I heard many who suggested over the weekend that it's connected to the very first commandment, because what does the first commandment say? I am the Lord your God, who took you out of Egypt, the house of bondage. Okay, God is taking us out of slavery, so I'm going to teach you the laws relating to slavery. But what we see here is something much more fundamental. It's God is essentially transforming slavery. Slavery used to be amongst all the other nations a framework for if somebody failed somehow within society in some way, he becomes a slave until he can redeem himself forever, and he becomes property, and anything can be done to it. God is saying no more. I'm not going to stand for that. I don't believe in. At most, we could call this a framework for rehabilitation. We want to enable somebody who has fallen in society to get himself together, to learn how to manage things properly so that he can be freed after 6 years, possibly even earlier. And he can, and he should definitely do no more than 6 years, and then he should become again a member of society. So this is a huge transformation when considering what was at that day. I would even say that even today, I'm not sure yet that we've really learned how to rehabilitate those who have fallen within society. And this is a huge challenge, and it's beautiful to see in the laws. But this brings us to the Jeremiah, because it turns out that this transformation is so difficult that it's like a paradigm shift, and people don't make paradigm shifts very easily. Um, how do we know that this is connected uh, to the first of the Ten Commandments? Because God says so himself. He says here, "Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I made a covenant with your fathers, and I brought them out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, saying that after the seventh year," in other words, God now really connects the law of the Hebrew slave to the first commandment of the Ten Commandments. He says it very clearly. But your fathers would not obey me or give ear. So in other words, even then, it was just so difficult, they didn't really apply this properly. And then comes a king, and this is what we see in the beginning of this chapter, comes the king by the name of Zedekiah, by the name in Hebrew, means the king, the justice of God. So he wants to apply the justice of God, and he gathers all the Jerusalemites, and he makes a really big, deal. They make a covenant openly. They all swear that they're going to free their Hebrew slaves, because it's typically been more than 6 years, because they haven't been doing that. But afterwards, they turned about and brought back the men and women that they had set free and forced them into slavery again. So we see there's finally a real attempt to go ahead and fulfill this enlightened notion of slavery, and they can't do it. We don't know whether it's because the slaves themselves didn't find a way to get back into society and they really wanted to go back to slavery, or whether it was the people themselves couldn't manage without the slaves. Unfortunately, we've seen even in modern times that how difficult it is to give up slavery, because of the economical ramifications. This apparently makes God very upset, and the result being that God calls upon the king of Babylon to come back after he had once tried to come to Jerusalem, and God got him to withdraw. Now he's going to come back, and he's going to destroy Judea, and we're going to go out into exile, and the temple is going to be destroyed. So first of all, we see here, I think, two really very important principles. We see how God cares about everyone, including especially the slaves. We're going to see that also in the Parsha and other laws, that when it comes to the weak, when it comes to the stranger, the non-Jew living in the land, God really cares about them so much that he says, if you cause them to cry out to me, boy, are you going to be in trouble. So we see something very, very new and refreshing about the God of Israel and how he relates to these matters. The other thing that we see here, and I think it's remarkable, is how God adapts to the state of the people. In other words, if the people are limited, they haven't yet been able to make this transition. God didn't make a big deal about it until they actually vowed to do it and failed. It's almost like we know another verse in the Torah, which says that it's better that you shouldn't vow than that you should vow and not fulfill your vow. Now that they vowed and they failed to do so, the ramifications are extremely dire. So I think it's really fascinating how we can learn so much about the God of Israel, both in terms of what's important to him and also how he takes into consideration our weaknesses, but yet he is demanding when we take upon ourselves to do certain things. We really have to follow through. So with this in mind, we brought, as usual, a whole bunch of different verses from the Parsha. Some of them relate to this to the Eved Ivri, or the Hebrew slave, as we call it. But there are many other laws, very, very interesting laws, because I think they really highlight how the law of of Israel, that the Torah that God is teaching us is just so advanced, and this
If you want
fundamental
to go in the kitchen for a minute, you can.
until then. And with this in mind, I would love to go out into the breakout rooms and not just discuss the fundamental, unique aspects of what the law of the Torah is all about, but also how considerate God is uh, of our needs and our limitations. In on one hand, encouraging us to make the transformation that we should make, and on the other hand, when we're not yet ready, or even the first matter that we mentioned, if God wants a direct relationship with every single one of us, but we're not yet ready to, we don't feel ready enough for that direct relationship. So God gives us a temporary framework that enables us to still have a relationship with Him, even if it's not direct. And I think that's very beautiful to see. It's kind of like a father, how he understands the son and he really wants him to grow, but to grow, of course, in a way that the son is capable of. So these are the questions, the perspectives that I would love to discuss within the context of the breakout rooms.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yair. You've given us a lot to chew on here. Some deep stuff too. So Kim, I think let's just jump into the Havruta groups together, and we'll get right into the meat of it. It's good. When we come back to the main room, it's always good to hear someone like Jocelyn happy that it's a sign that things were going well in the breakout room.
The joy of the Lord comes in the morning.
Oh, well.
Amen. So yes, it's exciting every Sunday morning.
But you know, it's interesting, Jocelyn. Just a side note, we move into a new month. Rosh Chodesh is this week, Tuesday night. We move into the month of Adar. And the month of Adar is the 12th month in the biblical Hebrew calendar, because then we move to Nisan, right? But this year we have 2 Adars. But nevertheless, all I want to say is this is your month, Jocelyn, because it's the month of joy and
Joy.
smicha. It's the Jocelyn month.
Who wants to join me on my train of joy? My train, woo woo, woo woo.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, now I want to know what Yair said at the end of the meeting, because
Yes.
Well, I'll just say that we discussed how God seems to have released us from any kind of mode of master servant, master slave, because the laws of the Hebrew slave do not just apply to us, that we have to free our Hebrew slaves, but God too is freeing his Hebrew slaves. And he's basically telling them, you now have a choice. You have a choice not to be a slave, but rather to be a partner. And this is what I believe is happening today. Sometimes we look around us, especially in Israel, and you see a majority of people who don't seem to be following the Torah, not following the law. We have to realize that this postmodernistic spirit that's engulfed the entire world, part of that, according to many rabbis that I've heard, is to free us from a need to do something simply because there's an authority that tells us we have to do it, and allow us to come back into a relationship with God because we want that relationship, not from a place of a sense of being forced, but rather to be in a place where we want that intimacy with God. We want to know him. We want to be able to do what he would like us to do from within.
Amen.
Jocelyn, that's what you're referring to, right?
You added to what you were saying, which is, yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, fine.
Cool. Did anybody else, any other groups? Anybody want to jump in and share some thoughts that stood out to you? No problem, Denise. You're funny. You'll be embarrassed. Anybody have any thoughts? I mean, our group, if we have to volunteer, from our group, we spent a fair amount of time kind of talking about the Hebrew concept of eved. So like how typically translated slave, but using the Hebrew word, kind of came up that it's useful to distinguish between like my cultural sense of what a slave is, which has meaning and has value in the context of our culture and our time, but that the word eved in this context here is not a perfect parallel necessarily to what I think of as slave, and that's very important because if you want to understand what God is telling the Israelites here, you need to understand the concept of eved in the context of this time of this people group, and then we went into a little bit more just talking about the idea of of debt and being required to pay back a debt, either if, and Yoav brought up a really great point, if you committed a crime and you needed to pay back for that crime, then being declared an eved and sold to somebody to basically pay back that debt was a restorative act. It was a restorative thing. You don't just go and rot in a prison cell and do nothing and produce nothing, and all of your talents go to waste, and you probably get trained to become a drug dealer. In this case, you could actually positively have relationships and work and produce and be able to pay back the debt which is a healing act.
Even get married.
And even get married and have children. And then you might love the guy that you're working for so much that you tell him, listen, I just want to stay. Can I hang out here in Club Med? And I got my wife and my kids, and there's a nice palm tree outside. I don't want to leave. And he says, all right, but you're going to have to get an earring. And
And when Jubilee comes, you're going to have to give that up as well.
We in our group, we started off. We continued the conversation of the Hebrew slave as well. But one of the things that Chris brought out, so we talked about the connection to Yosef, though, the very fact that the first Hebrew slave was Joseph. And then Chris brought out something amazing, that if you start to look at the fact that the laws that we're dealing with right away have to do with being put in if your oxen falls into a pit, Joseph was put in a pit. Kidnapping, Joseph was kidnapped. Then you come to the place, where Hashem has to watch him be a slave. So you see and then later, which something we talked a few weeks ago, once again, we see Yosef, the tribe of Yosef, with Ephraim, we see them being put under, again, a form of slavery under King Solomon. And this is the whole issue that ultimately splits the kingdom between the north and the south. And so we identified this issue with Yosef. And then we also talked about the connection between Shemitah, the orphan, the widow, and even Hashem says, he's going to bring judgment speedily. And could we even be seeing events that are unfolding here in the earth right now because we are turning a blind eye to the widow and the orphan and the stranger as well? And then John also brought out the connection to sin as well, and that the connection not only for the individual but for the collective conscience, and how God is teaching us we have to be mindful of our brother and our fellow man and how we treat them. So this was kind of our summary. If any of our team would like to add anything to that, please go ahead.
I'd like to hear more about the dividing of the kingdom there, that concept, how you got that. So if anybody wants to share.
Is that Lily?
Yes.
Lily, that had to do with when you go into the book of Kings, you might remember the story of Jeroboam. And Jeroboam was a mighty warrior, actually, and King Solomon, hires him to oversee the tribute of Yosef. So Yosef is like this, for whatever reason, this tribe, like Ephraim, Manasseh, they are being like indentured servants in Solomon's kingdom. Well, as that story goes on, Jeroboam does not want to do what King Solomon has said, so he flees, and he's on his way to Egypt to hide, and he meets a prophet. And the prophet has taken a garment and he rips the garment into 12 pieces and he hands 10 to Jeroboam. And he says, you are going to be the next ruler when God splits the kingdom. 10 tribes are going to come under your auspices and 2 will stay with Judah and Benjamin. And so he goes. And of course, after Solomon's death, we see the events unfold and the kingdom becomes rent in twain. So Lily, that's kind of just a very simple explanation.
Thank you.
But I think that one of the interesting principles that we see from that story that you just shared, Kim, in how the 2 kingdoms ultimately split, is that we can see that even though the Hashem gives us in the Torah very, very sublime laws, something that we really have to work hard in order to be able to fulfill properly. The journey is difficult. The journey is extremely difficult because it's just so way beyond the paradigms of those times. Moving from a slave mentality to that one of a free person who wants to fulfill God's destiny in the world. That's like it's such a huge difference when you compare it with what was acceptable at that time. So there are all kinds of challenges on the way, and very often it results in exile and splitting of kingdoms and so many other things. But God promises us, and that's why I think we live in these amazing times. First of all, God is with us throughout this process. We see how He takes into consideration our state, and He is compassionate, and He doesn't exact justice, he exacts justice on the long term, but not on the immediate term. And He's with us in this entire process, like a loving father, a parent who recognizes the limitations of his child, but He allows the child to grow. And that process is a long process. I think we live now in times where authoritative, when we try to force our children or our grandchildren to behave in a certain way, it doesn't work anymore. God is already, the time has come for us to really enter into a different kind of relationship with God. And God is allowing that to happen. And I believe that if we look around us, we can see it's really happening.
I just want to continue what Gabe started. So in our group, we spoke a lot about freedom in a more modern way, like what does that mean? But Dean spoke about freedom and slavery, and that got me thinking. In the verses that Yair, that you brought, we always see that God is always reminding us, you should treat a stranger better because you are a stranger in Egypt, right? But He doesn't say the same about slaves. Meaning, He doesn't say you should treat don't make slaves because the Egyptian made you a slave. Why is that? Meaning, and that got me thinking that if you look on a stranger, what did a stranger do wrong? Meaning, he didn't do anything wrong, right? He's just maybe like a non-Jewish person who lives in a Jewish country or in a Jewish community. He didn't do anything wrong. He's a normal person who is just a bit different. And that's us in Egypt, meaning we were Jews who lived in Egypt among non-Jews. But a slave, like Gabe said, a slave is somebody who did something, right? He stole, he needs to be punished. So if this is a definition, then in Egypt, we were not slaves, meaning we didn't do anything wrong that made us slaves. We were a stranger. We were a group of strangers who got abused, right? But we didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do any crime that, a judge will say, okay, you need to be sold to slavery. We were just in the wrong place in the wrong time. And I think maybe that's the big difference between the two, meaning God don't want us to treat the strangers differently because we were strangers. Slaves is something else. Slave is somebody who did something wrong, like Gabe said, and that's something very different. So that's just something that
very illuminating, very illuminating.
But Dean, you can continue more about freedom.
Good. It's
that was much more your thing.
Well, it's sort of interesting for those of us here in Canada. We're a little bit more familiar with what's been going on this past week than maybe internationally, but we've had a demonstration that began with our truckers who said on January 15th, they were told they couldn't cross the border unless they were vaccinated. And so all the vaccinated truckers going, hey, this is not fair. We're together. This mandate is, should be a free choice. And so all of a sudden they says, okay, everybody jump in your trucks and let's head to Ottawa. Well, our prime minister came out and he says, this is a fringe movement. Well, if you take a look at what's happening in Canada, we're not used to this. Okay, first of all, we're not like America or Israel where we demonstrate in large numbers. Our Canada Day never saw the amount of Canadian flags and Canadians that were there in 35 below weather yesterday and are still there and are saying they're not leaving until the mandates are being released. So I'm watching this all week long. There's not a bridge that you drive under where their horns are honking and families are waving, giving cookies and baking cakes and bringing meat out and feeding people across this country as they drive to Ottawa. Then they get in Ottawa handing out free food and barbecues and it's just one huge party on our Parliament Hill today. And we don't know where it's heading, but all we know is Trudeau went into hiding. Okay. He said the wrong thing the other day. He said, this is a fringe movement. It doesn't represent Canadians, but it doesn't matter if you're vaxxed, unvaxxed, religious, non-religious, Punjabi or nothing, but everybody is just all excited, hugging, loving, generous. And so I'm going, then I read on Friday night, as they're all coming into Ottawa, ready for the big day yesterday and continued on already. It's going on right now. Horns are honking. Ottawa is absolutely closed down. I called Gabriel, says, did you get there? He says, I can't get anywhere, because you just can't move. 20 blocks, bridges are closed, tractor trailers, all over the place. And now it's happening in other Canadian cities. So anyway, it's all about freedom, freedom, freedom. That's all we've heard all week long. So I'm going, I get to chapter 34 of Jeremiah, and God says, let me define freedom for you, okay? And he says, this is what I'm going to do to you. So I'm going, oh God, have mercy on us. So I'm feeling in this, there's this excitement in me because I'm watching Canada do things that Canada doesn't do, okay? And at the same time, I'm seeing some signs about Trudeau that are really not nice signs to talk about your leader, okay? And yet I'm watching Trudeau acting like a pharaoh, okay, with some pretty definitive statements. And I'm going, and now it's having, it's getting on, the normal networks have ignored it, okay, up until the last couple of days, okay, because you can't ignore it anymore. And now it's actually, it's going international. So I don't know where it's going. Listen, let me just show you a little clip for some of you others.
He's got his clip. He always has his clip.
It'll be awesome.
You ought to experience it just a little
Yes,
bit.
it's
This
awesome.
is one that I saw today. I mean, if you hit Freedom Convoy, there's
Let's see
hundreds of videos now.
Okay, let's see it, Dean.
Can you see this?
We can
Yes.
see it.
Yes.
Yep.
Is your audio shared?
I'm just gonna check my audio just to be sure that I
Make sure the
did. I
audio is linked.
sometimes forget it. Good thing I checked. Okay.
Can't believe we're playing Trudeau on our eNoam session.
No, but it's quite significant. So hang on here. Where do we go here?
I agree with you, Dean.
Yes, Canada is such a quiet and passive.
Are you
country.
seeing Trudeau here?
Yep.
We see it, Dean.
Okay, let's see what let's see.
You gotta hit play.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing.
Guys, sending love from Renfrew, Ontario. Go get them, boys and girls.
I'm Tim. I'm Tony.
I'm Maggie.
And we're from Alberta. Thank you for fighting for our freedoms. Love you guys. You guys are the best and waiting for you in Ottawa.
Thank you for fighting for us truckers. Thank you for fighting us for truckers. It's Riley in Brooklyn, and we just wanted to say that we appreciate your loyalty for standing up for our freedom. To all you truckers out there, be safe. Have a good night, and I'll talk to you tomorrow in a Big 10-4.
Big 10-4, Rubber Ducky.
Hi, my name's Nicholas. I'm Indigenous, and I like to support my trucker.
Thank you, truckers. Good night. Thank you. I'm Jason. Thanks again, Bobby. You guys.
Favorite vehicle is trucks too.
Thank you guys so much for everything you're doing. Us students here at Briarcrest are very happy and thankful for you guys fighting for us.
A big thank you to all the truck drivers that's heading into Ottawa. We support you 100%. Thank you for what you do. Keep up the amazing work.
For your loyalty for standing up for the government. Have safe driving, truckers.
I'm from Ottawa and you got all my support.
God bless you all, honorable men and women, for waking up Canada. Get rolling there, guys. Good work.
God bless all the truckers and fighting for our freedoms. From our family, we love you all. Stay safe and stay strong. 10-4.
Wow.
So they're saying that they've broken convoy records, world records. Most of the trucks you saw in there, they haven't been able to even get across the bridges because most of those came from the outer parts of Canada, and the ones that were closest to Ottawa got in there, but they've closed 20 blocks.
Hello, everybody.
There's no room.
Pardon me.
So basically you're saying that rather than try to enforce from the grassroots are now calling out
Mhm.
to free
That's
the
right. Yeah, exactly.
slave. So this is really fascinating. You know, we have Mita in this week's parsha, and which is all about freeing from debts. I read an article. Alan might be able to help us here because I read about this for the first time, that the Roman Empire fell because too many people fell into debt, and a very small percentage of Romans that held all of these debts ultimately kind of enslaved them, and they had nothing to lose, so therefore they basically brought down the Roman Empire. Prior to this, there was somebody called Antoninus Pius, who was an emperor who did a Shemitah on his own. He actually freed all of the Romans that were in debt from their debt. Interestingly enough, Antoninos was a chavrusa with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and a chavrusa that the Talmud talks about, and many fascinating discussions that they had between them. And the advance of the Torah here is that rather than let rulers decide when there would be a freeing of debts, and as we saw very often, they didn't free them of debts because they felt coerced by those who held those loans. The Torah says, regardless of who's a ruler, God is the ruler, and He wants this freeing of debts to happen every 7 years, and something even more significant to have every 50 years. So in many ways, we see how the light of the Torah is there to guide us to societies that are healthier, to really make us feel more like families, where we care about each other, kind of like we see here with the truckers. And we want to make everybody's able to live their lives according to their conviction, and so that everybody can find their unique light and follow God in the way that they want to follow God, and enter into an intimate relationship with God rather than be told, what kind of relationship they have to have. And this, I believe, is really the mark of our times. And look forward to seeing how God...
They say they're not leaving until the mandates are released. And so, and somehow the law officials gave them they call Ottawa the biggest parking lot in the world right now. So it's really, but the thing that is that impacting me is I'm watching, even in my own personal, amongst my siblings, like you don't talk about vaccination or not vaccination in my family. Okay. It's just sort of like, let's keep it shut because it's a polarizing view. We don't want anything to polarize. However, one of my sisters threw a video up, and my brother goes, freedom? Did we ever lose our freedom? And so that caused me to think, do we really know what freedom is?
That's right.
And when I listened to you here speaking about this first commandment, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Do we understand slavery today or exile? The average Christian doesn't understand that a Jew is considered in exile if they're living outside of Israel. But my thought is, and I brought this up at the meeting, and so I'm a big heretic now. Maybe the Jews that are living in Israel are somewhat in exile, because if our gods are democracy and we are living under those rules and we've put those rules ahead of the Torah, okay, is it possible, okay, that we, all the gods had to be taken down before they left Egypt. They took down communism before they left
Russia,
the former Soviet Union. Is there some gods right now that have role in our lives that need to come down in my life, that I've subtly submitted to over time? Do I really know freedom? A freedom and the fullness of this love of God that wants me to come into His loving freedom. So that's the challenge that's before me as I plead for mercy for our country right now, for my leaders, for every trucker, for the evil intent that might want to interfere with some of the loving that's going on. The honeymoon might be over by tomorrow. I don't know, but not quite sure what's ahead. So but anyway, that's where Dean's coming from today.
Dean, you can take the Jew out of exile, but sometimes it's hard taking the exile out of the Jew.
Yeah. Amen.
So Rick, did you want to share something?
I want to say one short thing. The video that Dean showed you was from Rebel News, and Rebel News is run by a a Jewish guy by the name of Ezra Levant.
Yeah.
So thanks to everybody for working together on this project. What were you going to say?
Yeah, to get back to something that was said earlier about intimacy, you can see that in what happens when the people want Moses to go talk to God and come back and tell them. That's what happens. Moses goes up on the mountain alone and brings back the tablets of stone. But later on, what happens is that God tells Moses to come up on the mountain and bring the priests and the elders up on the mountain. Now he said, stay at a distance, and Moses come forward. So you begin to see this move towards intimacy with God, that now the priesthood and the elders are on the mountain. They're not quite into that intimate relationship that Moses has, but they're moving towards that. I think that's a beautiful illustration of what Yair was saying earlier.
Beautiful.
You know, on one point on that, Rick, just to respond to you, I was thinking that this morning. It was just occurring to me that this this experience or discovery of God that the Torah teaches is a collective experience. It's not one where individuals hide by themselves in a cave and they write these fancy books and then become these incredible. It's a together experience. They together saw the mountain. They together heard the voice that terrified the whole group of them. It was a collective experience, and that is a pattern that you can see with the God of Israel, where it's like there's a collective experience of Him and of His ways, and also of collective failings. Of people fail together, people hurt together, and that togetherness seems to be really integral. All through the Bible. I wanted to give Edward, you had your hand raised and you took it down, so I just wanted to give you a second here, maybe the last word as we're about to wrap up.
Oh, thank you. Mine was a question concerning Jonathan's sharing earlier about slaves having done something wrong. And my question is regarding those slaves who were enslaved against their will, like Joseph, who was sold. It was against his will. He was enslaved. So what would the law speak concerning such slaves?
I'd like to point out that in the Pasha, it says that any slave that escapes, unlike what was common, where if you came across a slave who escaped, you had to restore him to his owner because it was like returning property. In the Torah, it says you must never give him back to the master. Recognize the fact that there are many things, unfortunately, that happen that can cause all kinds of states of injustice. But it's our job to rectify those injustices. And if somebody, for example, had by no mistake of his own had not gone into slavery, we have to try to free him. And in fact, one of the greatest commandments that we've seen throughout Jewish history was something called Pidyon Shvuim, which is freeing of those that are hostages. Enormous amounts of money were collected by Jewish communities in order to free Jews who had fallen into any kind of slavery or anything like that. And I think that's really what we have to focus on, how we really cultivate that collective sense of family that Gabriel mentioned. Collective, yes. The only way to overcome these things is collectively. We have to really cultivate a sense of family that causes us to work collectively to free every person so that he can fulfill his destiny with God, achieve his intimacy with God through choice, and not by being forced into some kind of a mold of behavior by someone else.
Wonderful.
And I think, Edward, too, it's God really is making a huge, huge statement that
Bye, bud.
his servanthood. This, because that same word, I know it was discussed in several of the groups, the word avid being servant and also used for slavery, right? But no human being is chattel. No human being is a thing. Everyone is made in the image of God. So God was relegating the Hebrew, and it does say Ivri there, the Hebrew slave, if he had committed a transgression against a neighbor, he's bringing this into, and he's removing this kind of, he's removing slavery from the mass of injustice. In other words, he's saying you cannot hold another man against his will unjustly. There is no justice there. He's bringing freedom in levels that are indescribable, even in modern society today, that what God is doing. And he also says, and if a master or anyone is caught holding another individual and treating them like chattel, they are supposed to be released, as Yair just said, immediately. They are not supposed to be held. And you
A
really
person who chains another human being is actually punished by death in the Pasha.
Yes, it does. It is. And it's very sad that history has slavery the way that it does. And you really begin to see the difference between what God has truly ordained for humanity versus the way the nations and that have served other gods have treated humanity. So sad. Very, very sad.
Yeah. Well, everybody, I think we've reached our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution. It's been a really productive discussion. I think we all have a lot to chew on for sure. I'll wish you all a Shavua Tov. You can unmute your microphone.
Rosh Chodesh Tov, especially for Jocelyn. Rosh Chodesh Tov.
Happy freedom in Hashem.
Yes.
Let it be 12 months of the year, not just 1 month, okay? The joy of the Lord is our
we have
strength.
2 months this year, 2
Bye,
days.
everybody.
Okay.
Have a blessed one. See you next Sunday. Yay. Let's keep trucking. Let's keep trucking.
Wow.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you. Love you.
Everyone.